Hello, today I'm going to be doing a book review on the all-new Square Foot Gardening by Mel Bartholomew. Now, this is his second edition, and this book is an absolutely wonderful book. It is very well written. It has lots of pictures and illustrations and charts and everything on how to do things. Now, in this book, you'll see charts, and he's got lots and lots of them. He's got charts for everything, which is really, really good for practical sort of advice. Now, what does this book do? Well, it takes a fresh look at gardening and comes up with a whole new way of doing things. He pays particular attention to the detail, and he begins with 1 square foot. He says if you know how to garden 1 square foot, then you can expand that on. And slowly he expands 1 square foot into 16 square feet in a module of 4 foot by 4 foot. And these are the modules that he works on, and then you can just take one module and expand it all the way through. Now, he redefines things like plant spacing, and he backs this stuff up with good arguments and a wealth of experience that he's had over the years, both from himself and from people that he's taught all over the world. Now, he includes things like, in his book, things like spacing charts, planting temperatures, soil temperatures for planting, the sowing of and harvesting times, and successional planting, so that when you plant in succession, so that you've got enough to feed yourself every day with fresh food without having a glut of food. Now, he goes into detail on how much space you need per person, being it an adult or a child or whatever you're doing. And he gives really, really good details. Now, he also offers a lot of advice and tips on where to get information and for free. Now, Mel, being an American, offers a lot of this in America, but his tips are useful for people all over the world, because he'll give you advice on how to get information for free and who would be willing or has a vested interest in giving you this free information. This book of his is really it's a practical course on how to grow primarily vegetables and how to garden. And it can be a fully portable system, as Mel believes in using his own soil. He tells you to sort of disregard the soil that is there. So whether you've got if you've got a very, very bad soil and it's acidic and it's dusty and loamy or whatever, he tells you you don't have to worry about that soil, because if you put his special mix, now he gives you the formula for the mix, so he's not trying to sell mix, but he is trying to tell you what makes up a good mix. And so he gives you the formula of putting all this together so that you can get really, really fertile soil that will grow everything. And it's been time, and it's been tried and tested over many years. Another great thing about his book is all the plans on when where to sow and how to sow and stuff like this. No, it is a really very handy book, and it has a lot of detail. He covers things like vertical gardening. He covers other things like, gardening for seniors, and he covers all the different plant types. He covers, he gives you a little formula for planting depth, so that if you've got some seeds and you don't know what the planting depth was, he gives you a formula that you can pretty much get the exact sort of depth. So he's full of lots of tips and solutions. He's a very practical man and gives a lot of solutions. And it's a very, very handy book. So who does this book appeal for? Who is it useful for? Well, it has a really broad appeal, as a lot of the techniques in his book can be adapted to your personal use, depending upon your relationship with your garden. Now, things like, if you're into soil, looking after your soil and everything else like this, there's a lot of techniques that you can do that you can still care for your soil. If you're into your garden for relaxation, this is another thing that he can do, because his garden is a very simple way, and it takes all the back-breaking work out of gardening. And another thing is, if you're into production and you want to try and provide as much food as you can in a very small space, this book is particularly handy for that. But it is more suited to a small-scale gardener. Now, you're not going to get a farmer using this book. It's quite labor-intensive, and you can't drive big machinery over it, but it is very, very useful for the small-scale gardener. Now, when you're reading this book, it is for people that have an open mind. You've got to have an open mind, as these techniques are really fresh and revolutionary in their way of thinking. And it's very different from the old sort of techniques. And it is especially good for new gardeners and for getting people like the children into gardening. It's really useful for that, because kids have an open mind and they will experiment. And it's very, it takes all the hard, tedious work out of the garden and all the hard labor that kids, and it shows results relatively quickly. In fact, it tells you when you should come back and see the garden. It gives you really good ways of weeding your garden and knowing what is a weed and what isn't, because he's got precise planting plans on where to plant, so anything that's not there is a weed. So, his book is really, really clever with lots of solutions, and it'll suit people that are new gardeners and, children, certainly the schools, because this book is a bit like a course. And it tells you exactly how to go and garden all the way through. And it's also very useful for people that like to try new things, those that are experimenting and having fun in their garden. So if you're having fun in the garden and you're loving the garden, why not get this book and try a few of these techniques? You might be surprised at how much fun you can have with this book. But for those into permaculture, I don't really see a lot of value in this, because permaculture is a whole new way of thinking. Now, there are some overlapping principles, but I think they sit merely, really on opposite sides of the fence. And I'm not saying this book doesn't have value for people in permaculture. In fact, they might get some value, because there are some things that make them, that expand their thinking. And just like permaculture is quite a revolutionary thing now, so is all new square foot gardening. It is quite a revolutionary book, and it's a whole new thought process. And one thing I do know about permaculturists is they do love original thinking, and this book is full of it. So from that basis, it would also appeal to the permaculturist, although I do believe that a lot of their thinking sits on the opposite sides of the fence. That's who I think would be, it would be useful for those people, and I'd recommend it to them. So what do I make of Mel Bartholomew? Well, Mel Bartholomew comes across in this book as a very optimistic man and a very approachable man. He has a great sense of humor, and to me his most endearing quality is his great sense of the obvious. He is a very practical man, and he has some really good down-to-earth solutions for a myriad of problems that one may encounter in the garden. These qualities come through really strongly in the book and makes his book an absolute pleasure to read. I would love to meet Mel Bartholomew in person, and I would recommend that. It's not a book written for entertainment. It's a book that's written on a course, but he does it in such a lovely style. And he's really a great character, a person with great original thought, and a really down-to-earth guy. One of these guys that, you think, well, why didn't I think of that? One of these guys that, this is so obvious. No, I really like Mel Bartholomew. I think he's a great guy. So, what are my concluding statements? Well, I would recommend that book to all the gardeners. It's really a creative book, one packed with original thinking, and I really enjoyed reading it. I will be adopting a lot of his square foot gardening techniques in my vegetable garden, because I've divided my garden up into a vegetable garden and a food forest. Now, the vegetable garden, I'm only going to be adapting it because I'm going to be using my original soil. So this will be quite a nice experiment. I'm not going to be able to comment on the purest view of square foot gardening, but certainly I'll be able to comment on my adaptation for it and how I can utilize it in my vegetable garden. And one of the interesting things that will come out of this is because I'm going to be doing a food forest where I'll probably be planting mainly perennial things, fruit trees and bushes and stuff that are perennial. I might be planting a few annuals in there as well, as most vegetables are. And I will then, once I've got this going, I will then be able to give a really good opinion between square foot gardening on the one hand, my adaptation of it, and the permaculture food forest that I'm going to be doing. So if you want to keep up to date on all this sort of stuff, please look at my daily vlog on how I'm progressing on both these systems, and I thank you for listening.
Yes! Please subscribe!